skills lecture. Because unfortunately the person who comes and provides you information about using the library and what facilities are available in the library to help you do research, doesn't work on a Friday. And every single AAA lecture is on Friday. I have to admit, if I use lecture 3 and lecture 4 for the electronics students, that would literally be 3 hours of lectures on a Friday in a row. How awesome would that be? Smile. Good thing. Maybe. Okay, so what you should notice is that the first part of the lecture series is largely revolved around writing. I said last week that the material for this module is broken down into 3 areas. There's material about writing, there's material about research methods, and then a fairly broad selection of material about project management, the implications of running a project, and the implications of doing research. But at the beginning of the semester, obviously we focus on the material relevant to the first coursework, which is the written review. So we're focusing on writing at the beginning. Second notice is about the choices system. We're still waiting for the technical support people to release the updated version of the selection part of the system. They promised it by the end of today. That's the bit that lets you choose, right? If that makes sense. But you can. I did send around a link to a viewing feature in the system, which hopefully is letting you see. You can see the options, right? You can't pick them. Okay. I'll keep you updated, and I'll let you know the instant that they made the rest of the system available. Via the choices system, you're able to see, should be able to see, I hope, all of the information about the project: scope, description, supervisor, titles, keywords. If you can't see everything about it, please let me know, because that means there's another bug in the software. Okay? Okay, so topic for today. Who watched the videos? Really? What's the one thing I asked you to do this week?
Online lecture.
Okay. Who didn't watch the videos? Yeah, see, people are on it. Excellent. Like Friday afternoon honesty, right? Next week, no, better yet, over the weekend, watch the videos. Alright?
Small video.
Let me ask a slightly different question. Who here thinks they know how to write a report? I would hope it's most of you. You're master's level students, right? You've been through a degree already, right? Did it involve writing stuff? Okay. Do you think, for me, as an academic, right? So bear in mind, you're doing an MSc, right? The main component which distinguishes an MSc degree from an undergraduate degree is the writing and submission of a dissertation. Right? This is a very specific statement. As an undergraduate, you would have done a project. Project is a variety of projects, right? Okay, the MSc project is a block, an entity, a timing thing, which exists in your program. But the requirement for an MSc is to write a dissertation, not do a project. You with me so far? Okay. Do you think, for me as an academic, right, my job is to teach you things, to give you marks occasionally, and to do research. That's my job. And to do administration, but I never thought you would do that. But my job is to do research, right? What do you think I spend most of my time doing? Reading and writing. Right? It's like being 5 years old in school. Reading stuff and writing other stuff. Okay, yes, I spend most of my time writing things and reading what other people have written. And you can imagine that makes me slightly obsessional about the subject of writing things. Both in terms of me doing it well and me being annoyed at reading other people's stuff that don't do well. Okay? Now, you've all had the opportunity to write lots of things. In this particular scenario, for a lot of you, I don't know whether many of you have had the opportunity to write many things in English. Right? It's a slightly different statement. Okay? Now, this is my philosophical question. There is a saying in English, I don't know if it exists in other languages. If a tree falls in the woods, does it make a noise? Who knows that one? Do you know the answer?
You're there.
Hmm?
No,
Yes
I'm
or no?
hearing no. No idea if it's a doesn't mean.
It's a question rationally about combination of the philosophical question of does it matter if there's no one there to hear it, right? And a play on words in English about the difference in meaning between the word noise and the word sound. One is a physical thing, the other is something that you hear. Right? So, hence the philosophical discussion about it. But, let me ask a slightly different question. Why do you write reports as a student? Largely, the most difficult thing for myself in this type of lecture course, and I do this for the undergraduates and the MSc students, is trying to persuade you to care about this. It's boring, right? Okay. Imagine for a second that you do the world's best ever piece of research, world's changing, and you don't write it up. Does it matter that you did it? No. The most important thing about doing research is writing it up. The most important thing. Because without doing that, no one knows. And if no one knows, it doesn't matter. Okay? Same question, different subject, obviously. Why do you care about it as a student? It's a slightly different question. Bear in mind the thing I said at the beginning, about the fact you have to write a dissertation, because it's a requirement. Why do you care? Be honest. I'm not looking for some deep philosophical musings, right? Why do students care about writing reports? Marks! That's it. I told you it wasn't a hard question. You care about getting marks. Why do you care about doing it well? High marks, right? Excellent, we're on the same page. I like it. Okay, so I would argue, on the basis of that, and the fact that a fair number of your modules are assessed via a written piece of work, be that an exam, or an essay, or a technical report, possibly knowing one or two things about how to write well and quickly is, dare I say it, essential. Okay, so what we're going to talk about in this module obviously revolves slightly more specifically around how you write reviews, and I am going to have a few smaller discussion groups specifically about the topic of writing reviews, because reviews have a certain there's a certain thing about reviews which is unique to the concept of the review. But there are some general principles which hold true in any form of writing. And this obviously would be much easier if you'd watched the online video. But the structure of a technical report, let's conceptualize for a second a technical report. The way that I see a technical report, or perhaps more importantly, the people marking your reports and giving you marks see a technical report. It has a certain structure, right? Yes or no? Why? Yeah. It's easier to follow. Yep. Okay. A lot of my colleagues from the English department would tell me that I am a rubbish writer because I need a structure in order to make it easy to follow. I would argue, actually, in some respects, it is harder to write something with a forced structure, like chapters, sections, specific things, because actually it makes the written material more digestible. That sounds really weird, right? It's naturally in blocks, so people tend to read a block and then stop and think about it. And if you enforce quite a distinct structure, like every paragraph has a section heading, that means that people are stopping and thinking about what you've written in relatively small sections all the time. Which means that actually you need to write better. That sounds really weird, but your style is much more in your face when you do it that way. But who has a fair idea of the, let's just say, the traditional logical structure of a report? Yeah, okay. So that kind of idea. You start off, the abstract is not part of the report. Right, so start with that one. Say the abstract, throw it away. The abstract is a different thing. Right? But the report itself, there's some introductory material, there is your work, and then at the end you draw some conclusions. Why? Why do you do that? Why do you write it that way? Because I would argue that essays written in any subject, politics, economics, social science, they all follow the same structure. They all do exactly the same thing. They might not have the sections with the headings and the broken up stuff, but they all do the same thing. Why? Right. But does everyone think the same way? Probably, because otherwise people would do it different ways in different disciplines. Because you might make the argument, obviously, certain disciplines attract people with certain different ways of thinking. But that logical progression of information is always the same. So, background material that section which comes first is designed to make sure that every reader starts reading your material at roughly the same place. That's the point, right? So do you think the background material for every report is at the same level? Kind of. Who's most important in that scenario in terms of presenting the background material? The reader. So if your report was aimed at a different group, so if you're writing up your research for someone who's 10, would you present the same background material if you were going to present it to me? No. Because there's a level of knowledge assumed. There's the idea, I guess it kind of exists, that magically if you do a report the right way, anybody will be able to read it. Not so certain. Right? That's why it's very important in terms of any formally produced piece of work, like your dissertation, for me, as the person responsible for setting you that assignment, to provide you with the right target audience for you to be able to present the information. Right? Normally, in this scenario, your target audience is you before you knew anything about the project. Right? It's aimed at your level, with your level of fundamental knowledge, but without any specific knowledge about the subject. That's what most people would say. That's how it always works. You may find, will find yourself in scenarios when you leave here and get a job where that isn't true. But for the dissertation, the specific nature of the dissertation, and your research review, right, the target audience is you before you learned anything about it. Otherwise, I mean, that's a fair level of demonstration. Now, so background information is all about filling in information which is required in order to understand what comes afterwards. So, do you write it first? Do you? Okay. Let's say, for example, that you're doing a typical research project, and this is a long-standing philosophical discussion amongst academics about applying for money from the government to get a grant in order to do some research, right? In order for me to get money from the government, I need to say what I'm going to do and what the outcomes are going to be. If I knew what the outcomes were going to be, it wouldn't be research. Right? What did I say last week about research? Something new. Right? Something new. Right? There are degrees of newness. Newness? Novelty. That's the word. Thank you. The point is, fundamentally, research has an outcome that you're not sure of. You may have an idea of what it's going to do, but you don't know what it is. And the point is, for something as big as let's say, an MSc research project, or how many of you want to do a PhD? Why? Why? Serious question. The PhDs are awesome. Remember that. Use that in your interview. Anyway, an extended project which has an aim but no concrete expectation of outcomes, a proper research project, you don't really know what you're going to find. So, here I'm probably stepping on the toes of my fellow academics who will be your supervisors, right? There are three kinds of background information. There is contextual information about the research area, what it's for, what it means, right? That's what I like to call the arm wavy kind of material, right? It doesn't say anything. But it does provide a very important idea of value. Why do you want to do this? What does it mean? What will it do? Right? There is what I call general research area information, which is information about the research field that you're doing your project in, which tells somebody who doesn't know anything about it what it's about. Important thing, that information is mostly non-technical. It might be slightly technical, but it is really not information that tells people how to do research in that area. Right? It's setting the scene at a technical level. The third kind of background information is what have people done, how have they done it, what did they find, what did that mean, isn't it great, what did they do wrong? Right? The nitty-gritty technical detail of previous research in that field. Your research review is the first and second kind, not the third. Okay? Some of these supervisors will make some comments about the fact that surely the research review overlaps with writing a dissertation, because you need to do an in-depth, detailed literature review, right? Not a literature review. It is a general review of the research area of your project. Okay? But any piece of writing requires all three types of background material. Right? It needs the setting the scene so that the reader who knows nothing at all about the topic can start to understand what it is you're setting out to do. Right? The general research field stuff that you gain by just reading lots of stuff about the thing, and then the detailed technical stuff. The detailed technical stuff should only be the technical stuff that is relevant to your project. If it's not relevant to your project, there's no point in putting it in. Now, the point is, typically when you do research, you will continue to read as you continue to do your project. That was a hint. Right? The idea that you start off by reading 100 things and then you go, oh, I am going to be enlightened, I'm now going to do my project. Don't do that. Right? Because what you'll find is you'll read and run out of time for the second bit, mainly. Right? But the point is, your understanding of the field changes as you do work in it. It will. Right? So, the idea that you understand everything about the field when you start is wrong. Okay? Likewise, you may set out on your project, you may write your project plan, again this is a hint for later, with 3 or 4 different methods that you're looking to explore or use as you do your research project. You might very quickly, while undertaking it, discard 2 of them. Or your supervisor might say, focus on these 2. Right? The bits that you research that are not relevant, you don't present. You discard them. Right? Because they're not relevant to understanding your research presented in your dissertation. What that means is that first section, which we might call background or background of theory, right, or the literature review, or the bit at the beginning of your dissertation, you don't really know everything that has to go into it until the end, or towards the end. So you don't write it first. You might collect notes, you might write down passages, collect pieces of information. You should do that all the time. Right? But you don't write it first. You write it last. I sense dubiousness. Watch my videos. You'll see just how stilted and unnatural giving a video lecture is. Trust me. Right. The second thing that you do when you write something is you present your methodology. Right? You might call that experimental methods, you might call it techniques. There are a range of different things for it, right? But the key thing is you present your methodology. Why? Why methods? Anyone on the Friday? Yes.
So we can replicate your work.
Okay. Yes? Do you think many people pay attention to the idea of replicating work or not? You should do. It's very, very important. But I'd say at a fundamental level, the whole report should be based on the premise that the provision of information is so that people can replicate it. The reason for presenting your methods at that point in the report is because they should be based on the background material, right, which they've just read, and you should present a justification of what the method is supposed to show before doing anything with the method. The purpose of that method section is for you to lay out, based on the background material that you have just discussed in detail, why doing things a certain way will prove the result that you want it to show. That makes any sense. Sorry, I'll rephrase that, right? You're going to present some results which are intended to show a premise, right? The method, in the method section, you need to justify in advance why your methods will show anything at all. Then your results section, the bit that comes afterwards, actually should be relatively straightforward. Because what you're doing is just presenting the data that you have collected according to the method that you've already outlined. The whole intent of that structure, that logical presentation of information, has two purposes. And the reason for the sectioning in scientific writing or engineering research and development is that it is extremely common in writing and dissertations that you will refer back and the reader will want to refer back. That's the real reason. So that actually what you're doing is inside your report, sections of your report become references. And just like you cite references outside the report, your sections create references inside the report, which you cite later. And if you want at least a concept level idea for what should and shouldn't be a section, you can use that as a guide. If you need to refer to it somewhere else in your report, it should be a section, as a block of information. Then at the end, you write up your analysis and your discussion, and you draw some conclusions. What's a conclusion? Interesting. You almost said what was concluded. Ah, you should have done. Did anyone know what the word conclusion means? No? No? Sorry? Nope. someone who studies law this, they would tell me straight away what the answer is. Because the etymology of names, they're also very pedantic, right? More than me, which is saying something, right? Conclusion is the end of an argument. Weird thing about English is people think that English has a million words that all mean the same thing. In actual fact, that's not true at all. English has a bad habit of tending to have two words that mean the same thing, exactly two. Right? One that comes from Latin and one that comes from German. Right? British people are descended from Germans and French people, and Vikings, and Celts. So the languages come from Old French and Old German as an origin. So you tend to find in English there are two words for everything, one with different origins, right? But it is only two, which largely means that if you think there are 7 words that mean the same thing, they don't. What you've got is a word that has a more specific meaning, right? But it's commonly used in the general sense in the wrong way. The conclusion is one of those words. If you were doing an MSc in biology or medicine, we would be having an ultra pedantic version of this discussion. The thing that comes at the end of a scientific or engineering piece of writing is correctly called, as it would be in a medical journal, the summary of conclusions. That is the right name for the bit at the end of a report. It is abbreviated by most people to something called conclusions, or conclusion, which people look at and go, oh, it means end, or summary. It means neither. Right? The conclusion is the most important thing in a report. It does not appear at the end. It appears in your discussion. Right? As you said, the point is, the conclusion is what happens at the end. You conclude it. Right? You present some results, you discuss what they mean, and at the end, you provide a short, one-sentence summary that explains the significance. That thing, right there, is a conclusion. And at the end of your report, you take all the conclusions that you've made in your discussion, and you summarize them, thereby outlining just how important the overall piece of research has been. Now, in many respects, that ending bit, that last section doesn't contain anything new, because you'll have said it all in your discussion. Right? But what you're doing is laying out the value, the contribution that you've made, how novel it is, and what the value is. But the whole report itself is essentially a scientific argument. It is a research argument. Arguments start with basic information. What am I going to do? What have I found? What does it mean? And how good was I? Right? That is a report. It's a scientific paper. It's an engineering report. It's an MSc dissertation. It's a PhD thesis. They're all constructed exactly the same way, as a logical argument, which ends with a conclusion. So the conclusion isn't a summary. Right? It's much, much more than a summary. The key thing in the conclusion, something you discuss or something that you put at the end, is significance. And by the time I read that in any piece of writing, including a review, I should know exactly how significant it is and why it matters. There is a tendency, he says, and dives a little bit, that the conclusion, or shall we say the section called conclusion, at the end of a report, is a throwaway thing that you write in 5 minutes. Whereas in actual fact, it's probably the most important section of your report. Let me ask you a slightly different question. See if I can avoid rolling of the eyes in the last 5 minutes. You have a job. Right? You leave here, you go out, you get a job. You do a piece of work in that job and your boss asks you to write a report. What's the boss going to read? The introduction and the conclusion. That's right. He isn't going to read the bit in the middle. The bit in the middle is for somebody to follow up and repeat it. Right? The boss is only going to read the introduction and the conclusion. So the introduction and the conclusion, from that perspective, are just as important as the bit in the middle. Right? And you write them last of all. And for those of you interested in an abstract, I have a lecture all about abstract. The abstract is a summary of the whole thing. Right? The abstract is an advertisement. That's the way I think of it as an abstract, right? It kind of has bits of everything from the whole report in it, right? But it's really there to make people want to read the report. Yeah. Right? It's an advert. Look at it this way. Here's a scientific paper, okay? You're going to be reading some scientific papers, some engineering reports, a wide variety of material. They are all quite long. How are you going to decide which ones are worth reading? Or not? I recommend asking your supervisors about it. When you have one. But that's what the abstract's for. The abstract is there to highlight what you will get from reading this thing. What's the value? And yes, like I said, the significance is bound up in the conclusion. Okay, any questions? 3 minutes to go. Friday afternoon. No? Okay, excellent. That's exactly what I said. I didn't say something different.
Well, you mentioned the method. You started off saying that it was supposed to show why you show.
Yes, what is this method going to do in terms of, that's a good question, right? Well, the point of presenting your method is you say what the method is, and you say what that method shows when you use it, right? I think it's the same thing. Because you need to, what you want to do is, for you, when you discuss the results and what they show, for the person reading it, to have an idea of what the results have shown in advance. You want it to be with you, right? So what you do is you lay out, this is the method and this is what it shows. So they read your results and they're already getting an idea of what the results mean. And then you say it, right? It's the same thing, right? So, yeah, good question. Any other questions? Yeah, if you're doing a comparison discussion about methods and which one was the best, that will go in your literature. Yeah. Or your background material, or whatever you're going to call it. Okay. Go!